Let's talk a little Penn State here. Penn State putting together another excellent class, 13th overall on the 24/7 Sports. I mean, who do you really like from Penn State's class?
I have a scouting crush on Luke Reynolds, tight end commit. He's a 5-star prospect for us. And I mean, if you follow my work, you know Cooper Patagna, like we've been pounding the table for Luke Reynolds since the Elite 11 finals this past summer. And that's a quarterback event. And we really didn't know much about Luke Reynolds at all when we showed up. And they invited out some different pass catchers. They kind of focused on the tight ends, the Elite 11 staff did, which I think is an excellent play. Like that is such a smart play to just focus on one position group. And Luke Reynolds caught more passes than anyone else over the course of 2 days. And rare to see that. Sometimes these big time recruits will run a few routes, and then the next thing you know, they're in sweatpants, hanging out, drinking Kool-Aid, flirting with the trainers. That was not the case for Luke Reynolds. He wanted to compete. So we loved him then, dug into the profile, former quarterback, basketball player, elite testing profile. And then we're like, all right, let's see what he does here as a senior. And man, his senior season has been something else. I was actually watching his quarterback commit last night, Dante Reno, who's headed to South Carolina. And Luke Reynolds made 2 insane catches just on go routes down the sideline, beating large defensive backs that can run. So I'm a big fan of him. I think he could be an X factor in the Big Ten. I think Penn State did an excellent job of making that evaluation, getting him committed, because if this was a guy that was on the open market right now, I mean, there would be schools all around the country that want him. So big fan of Luke Reynolds, and just thinking about what Penn State wants to do on offense. I think he's going to give them something they haven't really had at that tight end position in terms of just a guy that can supplement the passing game.
And hopefully this encourages more good prospects to come out and run at stuff like the opening Elite 11. I mean, we were out there. I was like, okay, this is a pretty big deal if you're throwing to Reynolds during the Elite 11. Like he's a legitimate difference maker. That's because Jeremiah Smith was out there. What he had a tournament the next day, right? Didn't he have to go to the overtime or something like that?
All I know is me and Cooper Patagna. We're going to get like Luke Reynolds NIL gear. That's going to be in the Ivins and Patagna households. And he's just an awesome kid to talk to. So always like the ones where you can endorse them and like all right, I'm rooting for you on Saturdays.
Yeah, you want to bet on the kid. It's like some kids you have to take because the traits just. It's hard to find the traits, and you hope he doesn't act like an idiot. You like the ones that you're like, yeah, I like this kid as a player and as a person. So quarterback-wise, much like Notre Dame, I think Penn State fans have a lot to be happy about with Ethan Grunkmeyer, a guy who we saw at the Elite 11 and honestly has some pretty nice tools.
Yeah, I mean, same thing as kind of with Luke Reynolds. And right, I mean, you want to really peel it back. You go into the Elite 11 finals and most of the big name arms that are going to be there. And there's 24 quarterbacks there, or is it 20, something like that. But there's a lot of different guys from different parts of the country. And for being a talent evaluator, some of them you haven't seen. And Ethan Grunkmeyer out of the state of Ohio, I totally forgot this until I was doing a little prep for this show. The state of Ohio doesn't really allow their high school athletes to play 7-on-7. And the 7-on-7 circuit, Bud, it's kind of it's not really key to the evaluation process, but it provides valuable data exposure points. And a lot of these big time quarterback prospects, they'll play for multiple teams. I don't even know how that's legal. I mean, you'll have kids from California playing on Florida teams. It's hard to keep track. But Grunkmeyer is someone we didn't really see. And my evaluation of him heading in the Elite 11 finals is like, wow, this kid could be something. He's got the tools, but I have no idea what to think. And that's because as a sophomore and junior, he was 7-15 on Friday nights, a 7-15 record, which is a bit of a red flag. I think with the quarterback position, I mean, you're going to hear a variety of different things about what matters. I think one of the biggest things is, all right, is this guy going to win games? Can he win games? Has he won games? What is he going to do, when he's got a deficit? And obviously some of these kids are on all-star loaded teams where they're surrounded by talent. It's much easier to win games in that case. But, other times they're the best player on the field. And it's like, well, he's not getting it done. So we liked Grunkmeyer routes on air out at the Elite 11 finals. We moved him into the top 247. And then it's just been a completely different story here as a senior. He ended up going 11-2, completed 67% of his passes, 3,400 yards, 39 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, also ran for 3 scores. I think this kid, when we look at all of the quarterbacks at the top of the board in the 2024 cycle, he is the one that is fearless when it comes to challenging the middle of the field. Like he's not afraid to throw it into the teeth of the defense. And I love that about him. Super unique story with him as well. Actually grew up as an Ohio State fan. I think he said the first time he ever went to Penn State was for Ohio State. It was like a whiteout. He went there as an Ohio State fan, and years later, now he's committed to the Nittany Lions. But no, I think Penn State, excellent evaluation. It's just like with Drew Aller, and Grunkmeyer actually worked with Drew Aller's quarterback coach there in Ohio. They train with the same guy. But yes, I think he's got all the tools. Interested to see, who Penn State taps as the next OC. But that quarterback room is also very fruitful because we like Jackson Smolik, who they took last year, flipped him from Tulane.
So if you're a Penn State fan, I read you guys all the time on Lions 24/7. They do a tremendous job there. I've known Tyler, forever. Offensive line has been a bit of a bugaboo for this program and this team, not so much on a week-to-week basis, but when they go up against like the very best teams. And look, a lot of teams look bad when you go face a bunch of future NFL defensive linemen. So there's no shame in at times struggling to block an Ohio State or Michigan. But I look at this, you got a top 100 tackle, you got a top 150 guard, you got another tackle who's just outside the top 150. This has to be one of the better offensive line hauls in the country. It's something that Penn State fans can actually be pretty excited about. It's a non-sexy position, but it's one that if you don't have it, you're going to find out real quick.
Yeah, I'm shooting from the hip right here. I would think it's probably a number 2 in the Big Ten, probably maybe behind Michigan, which isn't surprising given, the success they've had with that unit here in recent seasons. No, I think that is the strength of the class. And then, but I might be completely off base here, but when I watched Penn State this season, the big question mark for me was wide receiver. Like what is going on at this wide receiver position? And then you look at their commit list. I don't really love any of the 3 guys they got committed. They got Peter Gonzalez, Josiah Brown, and Tyseer Denmark. I think Gonzalez is maybe my favorite of the bunch, but I don't know if these are individuals that can be wide receiver 1 on Saturdays and beat the cornerbacks that you're going to see at Ohio State and Michigan, consistently beat them. And to me, like everyone wants to point with Drew and the offense. Like I just wonder about that receiver position. And I mentioned it a few minutes ago. This is one of the most stacked wide receiver cycles we've ever seen. And Penn State never really made a run at any of these high profile guys, these 5-star guys. And I don't know. That's just something that I've been pondering and wondering about. And maybe we have our evaluations completely wrong on those 3 receivers that I mentioned. But to me, that's where they need an influx of talent. And I would not be surprised if that's where they got super active in the transfer portal.
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to, and this is a program that has put receivers in the NFL and pretty consistently, right? Like we can think back on all the names, Dotson being one of the most recent ones. They went to the portal in the offseason and they got Cephas from Kent State. He was not able to get in for spring, if I recall. And so he was there for summer and just really never emerged as the number 1. And so when I watched him, I agree with you. I'm like, Keandre Lambert-Smith is a guy that's got a chance to play in the NFL, but he's not like a 1 for a team that is a serious playoff contender, right? He's like really nice too.
And if he's not, like, you can get away with multiple of those guys, but I think they lack the depth in terms. Like, I'm not saying you need a first round receiver to move the offense down the field, but I just think the floor of that room needs to be raised, and hopefully the ceiling as well. I mean, go get one of those dudes. Like, to me, Cam Coleman, who some of your listeners might be familiar with, 5-star receiver out of Alabama, was committed to Texas A&M. Florida State's been involved. Auburn, I think, now leads on the 24/7 Sports Crystal Ball. Like, why? why didn't Penn State just make a phone call and try to get involved there? Because that's something that they don't have on the roster. And maybe they did. But we saw Penn State try to recruit the Yellowhammer State last cycle. Like, they've gotten a little active down there. Remember, they beat Auburn. What was that, 2 years ago at Auburn? So that's the question for me with Penn State. What are you going to do at wide receiver?